Hello, Brubs. We're back with the 17 Mile Horror by Dick Gessler. I don't know what chapter this is, 7, I believe. Let's grab my little money thing and start reading. I'm on focus. Chapter 7. Carl was holding the best hand that he had had all night. A full house, aces over tens. When Cliff called him to the phone, Carl, a distraught Sarah, spoke into the phone. You've got to come home right now. Why, Sarah? Carl said disgustedly. Can it wait, me love? I've got me a winning hand. I just can't throw it in. Carl Warren, the devil with your winning hand. Come home. Please, Carl, come home. Why, Sarah? Carl realized now that it wasn't the fact that he was still playing cards that bothered Sarah. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. What in heaven's name is it? I can't tell you over the phone. Please, Carl, come home now. All right, Sarah. Now take it easy. I'll be there in a minute. Carl told Cliff to play his hand. He told him that something had come up at the funeral home and that he had to leave right away. He didn't tell him, however, that Sarah sounded very disturbed. Carl walked into the rear entrance down the long hall and pushed open the Dutch doors to the kitchen. Sarah was seated at the kitchen table, head in hands. She took a handkerchief out of her pocket and blew her nose. Her face was pale and drawn. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Oh no, he thought, as a cold chill came over him. She didn't find out. She couldn't. And yet, Sarah, he tried to sound as calm as possible. What is it you want to tell me? Sarah looked down at the handkerchief that she was twisting in her hands. Muriel came over to visit me today. We got to talking, and I told her about all the funny goings on around here these past few months. She said that we ought to go into the room and see for ourselves. Carl looked at his wife with disbelief. He had figured that since the incident at the dressing room when Ginny died, she would go nowhere near the room. He knew he had to ask her, but was afraid of her. Did you go into the room? Obviously, Carl, she did. Sarah looked up at her husband. Her eyes were red from crying. Her face was still pale from the shock of what she had experienced. Yes, Carl, she whispered. We went in there. Carl's hair stood up at the back of his neck. Cold chills went up and down his spine. He broke out in a cold sweat. The palms of his hands began to get clammy. She had finally found out what he had been trying so long to keep from her. He didn't want her to know all of the gruesome details of how he was helping Pete with the bodies. He himself was at first made sick when Pete told him what he had in mind. He had tried to tell the demented boy that it would be wrong to do what he had in mind. Nothing he could do or say, however, changed Pete's mind. In the end, Carl consented to go along with Pete's gruesome scheme. Carl's rationale in helping Pete was that he didn't want anything to happen to the boy. He knew it would break Sarah's heart if he was put away somewhere for the criminally insane. Pete told him that, after all, these were bad girls. They should be punished for what they were doing. Carl agreed that the way the girls nowadays were carrying on was sinful, and that they should indeed be punished. He, of course, knew that to impose the death penalty on these girls was not right. Yet, he still went along with the boy's wishes and helped him with the gruesome business. Carl knew that if he told Sarah what had really been going on, the shock might kill her. He did not feel that she could stand the horror of it all. Yet he knew that he had to come up with some explanation. After all, she had somehow managed to get into that room and saw a corpse. Suppose he told her that Pete had indeed kept his sister's body in that room all of this time. He could tell her what she already knew. Pete didn't want to forget the sight of his sister at the dressing table that last time he saw her. To keep her memory alive, he had to have a body sitting there. It was a gruesome thing to do, but it would suffice for an explanation. And what did you see? Carl said at long last. We saw, oh my God in heaven, Sarah screamed hysterically, as she got up from the table and waved her arms around the room. We saw Ginny's dead corpse sitting at the dressing table, just as I saw her last. Her face was being eaten up by maggots, and her eyes was all eaten out, and it was just awful. Sarah fell into the chair, her body shaking convulsively. Carl looked on helplessly as his wife continued to sob. He waited until she finally cried herself out. Sarah, my dear, you're right. Matter of factly, Pete did keep her body in the room at this time. He couldn't beat the thought that she was gone. It's okay then. I know what he did was wrong and I helped him, but I just couldn't see him so grief stricken. Hold on. I felt sorry for the boy. Sarah looked at her husband. Her eyes were almost swollen shut from crying. Her cheeks were red from the salty tears that had run down them. He's turned into a demon, Sarah hissed, her voice almost unrecognizable. He's got the devil in him. How could he do such an ungodly thing? How could he let her beautiful body end up being eaten like a piece of garbage? Oh, it's horrible. Just horrible, Carl. What are you going to do? Sarah, my dear, you're right. I'll take care of poor Miss Ginny's body tonight. We'll give her a proper burial. No one need know. After that, we'll try and get some help for the boy. As for now, taking you up to bed. I'm going to give ya something to make you sleep. Why does this guy talk like he's from fucking New York? I thought he was an Irishman. I guess that is kind of. When you wake up tomorrow morning, this whole business will be like a bad dream. Carl helped Sarah up the stairs to their bedroom. He helped her out of her clothes and into a nightgown. He went to the medicine cabinet and got a sleeping pill. He made her take it and sat by the bed until she was sound asleep. He then went down to the kitchen, reached up into the cupboard, and took down a bottle of brandy. He poured himself a stiff drink and drank it down in 3 gulps. He refilled the glass and sat down at the kitchen table. He felt guilty about lying to Sarah. In all the years that they were married, he had never lied to her. He took another swallow of the brandy. He had done the right thing, he thought. Why involve her in this? He would do as he told her. The body should have been disposed of at least a week ago. Something had happened to this one. They usually lasted about 6 weeks before he had to dispose of them. This time the body started to decompose at the end of 4 weeks. He did not wish to tell Pete that it was again time to get another body. Pete, in his demented state, did not realize that the body had started to decompose badly. To him, they all looked like his sister, that last time he had seen her. He had depended on Carl to tell him that Ginny needed some help. Carl would tell Pete that Ginny didn't look so good. Pete would then go out and replace the decomposed body. This last time, however, Carl could not bring himself to tell Pete. This whole business disgusted him. He had enough. It was sick, and if he did not put a stop to it soon, it would rob him of his sanity as it had Pete's. As he sat at the kitchen table, putting his thoughts in order, he heard a car pull up to the garage door. He heard the door open, then shut. In a minute, he could hear footsteps coming down the long hall. He turned around in his chair to see Pete standing inside the Dutch doors. Why, Carl, you're still up. Is something wrong? You're usually in bed before this. Carl looked at Pete as he entered the kitchen. He wore the same smiling mask that Carl had come so used to seeing these past. I think it's become so used to seeing these past few months. For the first time since Ginny's death, he looked at the boy with pity instead of fear. Carl knew that something had to be done. He needed help, and these killings had to stop. Pete, sit down in this chair. I want to talk to you. Carl's voice was stern, and the tone he used completely caught Pete by surprise. He looked at Carl and obediently took the chair that Carl offered him. Pete, it's Miss Ginny. I'm afraid we waited too long this time. She needs help. Carl hated to have to refer to the corpse as Miss Ginny, yet It was the only thing that Pete could understand. In his warped mind, it was his sister sitting up in that room, not a decomposed body. The grotesque smile was gone from Pete's face. Instead, his features softened and his eyes started to water. Poor Ginny, he started to sob. We must help her, Carl. She looks so pretty sitting in her chair, combing her hair, and now she looks awful. I'll have to get another one, Carl, just as pretty as the last. We'll make Ginny pretty again, won't we, Carl, won't we? Carl looked at the pathetic figure sitting across from him. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked like a little boy asking his father to fix his hurt. Carl's heart went out to him, and yet he knew that he had to somehow put an end to it. No, Pete, you mustn't go out and get another girl. Don't you understand? Ginny wants to rest. She wants to lay down. She's been sitting in that chair all these months, and she's tired. We have to put her to rest, Pete. But poor Ginny. No, Pete, she must be laid to rest. God bless her soul. Carl walked over to where Pete was sitting and helped him to his feet. With his arm around his shoulder, he guided him down the long hall to the embalming room. Carl went to the cabinet, which contained the gowns and protective clothing that he and Pete wore during the embalming process. He handed Pete a gown, mask, and gloves. Pete just stared at the garments that he held in his hands. He seemed to be in a state of shock. Carl helped him with the white gown. Then he tied the surgical mask around his head. He helped him put on the rubber gloves, and after Carl had donned his attire, he guided Pete through the door marked "No Admittance." They entered the old part of the mansion. Carl half pushed the boy until they stood before the old wine cellar door. Pete looked at Carl, a blank expression on his face. Carl smiled at him and pushed open the old door. They stood inside the old wine cellar that old Cecil B. Worthington had built for himself almost 140 years ago. My nose is really running. Hey, look at blurred page while I blow my nose. Real professional here. All right. Pete looked at Carl, a blank expression on his face. Carl smiled at him and pushed open the door. They stood inside the old wine cellar that old Cecil P. Worthington had built for himself almost 140 years ago. Carl flipped a light switch, and a single light bulb in the center of the large room faintly cast its glow over the rows of wine racks that lined both sides of a long hall. At the end of the hall, a staircase could be seen. Carl helped Pete along the hall until they stood at the bottom of the staircase. Carl pushed an old light switch located on the wall to the right. The light, which was located on the landing, about 20 steps up the staircase, faintly illuminated the old steps. The walls on either side of the steps were made of stone. The stones were moist, and the faint light caused them to glisten. Carl started up the steps. After he had taken a few steps, he stopped and looked behind him. Pete was slouched against the stone wall. His body was shaking, and he was sobbing. It was the same thing that happened every time that they had to dispose of the body. Pete, in his disturbed state, wanted to keep the body. In his mind, it meant that he was losing his sister all over again. He could not bear to look at the decomposed body. In his demented mind, this body was his sister. And he only wanted to remember how beautiful she was, not to see a body with its beauty all eaten away. On the other hand, he knew that this body was not the lasting image of his sister that he wanted. He wanted the young girl with glowing cheeks and sparkling blue eyes to be sitting where he saw Ginny sitting. And yet he knew that to do this he would have to kill again. The first few times it had no effect on him. He thought nothing of killing these girls. The last girl, however, was different. As he looked at her as she lay on the table before he made the incision in her main artery, he felt a deep remorse. How could he snuff out a life of one so young? A girl who had her whole life ahead of her. He had almost made up his mind to return the girl to the park when he thought of the decayed body that was sitting in his sister's chair in her bedroom. No, no, he couldn't leave poor Jenny up there looking like that. He had to kill this girl. He had to keep his sister's image alive. Pete, my boy, we have to do this. You know we do. Come along now. This will be the last one. Carl helped the boy up the stairs. When they reached the landing, the steps took a sharp turn to the right. Another 15 steps, they reached the second floor landing. They were now standing behind the fireplace in Ginny's room. Carl stepped through an opening into the bedroom, followed closely by Pete. Carl walked directly over to the large clothes chest, ignoring the figure seated at the dressing table. From the top shelf of the closet, he removed the sheet. He walked over to the canopied bed and laid the figure sheet across it. Pardon? Pete had entered the room and stared at the figure seated at the dressing room. All right, Pete, let's get it over with. Carl walked over to the figure and started undoing the zipper at the back of the gown. Pete, Pete, Carl hollered. Give me a hand. I can't lift her by myself. Pete, acting like a robot, walked over to the corpse. He helped Carl lift her from the seat and carry her over to the bed. He asked Pete to hold her so that he could remove the gown. After he had slipped the gown to her waist, he laid the decomposed body on the bed. Pete looked down at what was once a beautiful girl in her late teens. The eyes, which he had propped open when he embalmed her, were now sunken deep in their sockets. Sheets of grayish-white skin had peeled off her face in layers, exposing the skeletal structure beneath. Her large, firm breast had now shriveled, and her once beautiful body was now covered with deep wrinkles. When Pete prepared the body, he slid a tendon under the girl's right arm and the tendons behind each knee. This enabled him to sit the body up in the chair. He knew that in young, active girls such as he had killed, rigor mortis set in rather quickly. Slitting the tendons enabled him to position the body any way he wished. The girl was still in the sitting position when Carl had laid her on the bed. As Pete reached down to straighten out the girl's right arm, the stench from the decomposed body almost caused him to vomit. After he straightened the arm, he did the same with each leg. Carl spread the sheet next to the body. With Pete's help, they rolled the corpse onto the soiled sheet. Carl took the dressing gown, which he had removed from the body, and hung the garment back in the closet. With Carl taking his arms and Pete the legs, they started to carry the young corpse to the secret staircase. When they got as far as the fireplace, Carl stopped. Leaning the body on a chaise lounge, which was situated near the fireplace, he reached up and pushed in the second brick on the second row of bricks that made up the top of the fireplace. A loud click could be heard in the quiet room, and then the movement of the sliding door. In a moment, they had the body on the landing behind the fireplace. In a few seconds, the sliding door closed behind them. They carried the corpse down the steep staircase, through the wine cellar, and into the embalming room. After the body was placed on the embalming table, Carl went out of the room through the door marked private. He entered the storage room where the display of caskets were kept. He selected a coffin made of pine, one of Pete's less expensive models. He rolled the coffin out of the room and into the embalming room. He placed it next to the table. He opened the lid and with Pete's help placed the corpse of the young girl into the coffin. Shall I place her in the viewing room, Pete? Carl asked as Pete stood looking at the now closed coffin. Yes, Carl. I'll make the arrangements tomorrow. After they had removed their masks, gowns, and the gloves and washed their hands, Pete helped Carl move the heavy coffin up the ramp to the main floor and into the small viewing room. Carl, Will you turn out the lights in the embalming room and take care of things? I'm going to go to the study. I'll take care of everything, Pete. You just sit down and try to relax and have yourself a drink. It might do you a lot of good. Pete never drank, at least not until Ginny died. He found that every time he had killed a girl, even though he wasn't conscious of it, he felt remorse. After he had completed the embalming process and the girl was dead on the table, his whole body would shake convulsively. His, his head felt like it was ready to explode. He found that by taking a few stiff drinks of some of the old brandy he found in the liquor cabinet in the old study, his body would relax. He could feel the tension slip away, and after a few more glasses, he felt nothing at all. He walked into the heavily carpeted study, flipped on the light switch, and opened the glass door of the large mahogany liquor cabinet that had been used by his great-great-grandfather. Great-great-great-grandfather, pardon. He removed the glass and a gold decanter and placed them on his desk. He poured himself a large drink and sat down in his leather chair. With trembling hands, he took the glass and placed it to his lips. He swallowed half of the contents of the glass, then sat back in his chair to await the relief he knew would soon come. Slowly, the trembling in his body stopped. He could feel the nerves relax. In a few minutes, he felt completely composed. He poured another glass and sat to contemplate the yellow liquid. Carl was wrong, he thought. He couldn't bear the thought of living without Ginny. Who else could he turn to tell all of his troubles? To whom could he confide when he had a problem with a girl, as he had now with Nancy? When he talked to Ginny, sitting in her room combing her hair, she listened. Yes, he knew that she never answered, but she understood. She didn't have to speak. He knew what she thought and felt, and somehow, when he had a problem, she always had an answer. No, there was only one thing for him to do. He would have to make Ginny all better again, so that they could have their talks. Carl would understand. He always did. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the last time that he would have to fix Ginny up again. This time, he would ask her questions that would help him. He would promise her that he would not keep her sitting up in her room anymore. After she told him what he wanted to know, she could go and rest, just like Carl said. What was tomorrow? Oh, yes, Friday. It was always easy to find one on a Friday. They were always out for a good time on a Friday. He would go to Levan Knoll. He liked the undergrowth in that site. It completely shielded him from the picnic area, and it was closer to where he had hidden his van. He had his van hidden, pardon. The van that Jesus Christ. The van that reminded him he would have to have Carl drive the van. The van that reminded him he would have to have Carl drive the van over to the park tomorrow. That's very clunky. He would follow in his LTD and he would pick up Carl and they would drive back home together. Ginny, dearest Ginny, he thought, I promise you, it won't be long now, and you'll be able to get the just rest you so deserve. Chapter 8. Let's see how long this fucking chapter is. 75. That's 8 pages. Alright, we can do it. Chapter 8. Maybe I'll turn on the light. That doesn't really do shit. At least it takes off the glare. Nope, turning it off. Chapter 8. The chimes in the bell tower of St. Paul's Episcopal Church were ringing the hour as Pete stopped for the light on Mill Street. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. As he passed Walter's restaurant, he looked to his right and caught a glimpse of Sam sitting at one of the back booths having his breakfast. Pete drove a block beyond the restaurant and pulled over to the curb. Carl, drive the car home for me and park it in the garage. I'm going to have some breakfast with Sam. When I get back, I'll call Shady Lawn and tell them I've got a last-minute client. They'll give me a hard time about it, but I know that they'll have a grave dug for me by tonight. Carl slid under the wheel after Pete closed the door. Without saying anything, he drove off. Pete stood on the curb and watched the fast-moving car. Carl was angry, and Pete realized it. When he had asked Carl to help him put the van in the park, he had told him no. Carl pleaded with him to put a stop to the killings. He reminded him that poor Ginny needed a rest. When he had told Carl that this would be the last one, he finally relented and went along with his plan. Pete went in the back door of the restaurant and walked over to the booth that he had seen Sam sitting in. He patted Sam on the back and took a seat. Well, if it isn't my friendly Undertaker, Sam kidded his young friend. What have you been up to? I haven't seen you in a couple of days. Nothing much, Sam, just the usual business. I had my monthly mortuary meeting last night. The usual month-end books and, just routine. How's it going with you? Well, Pete, my boy, after screaming and hollering at the mayor, I finally got the money I need for some extra men to patrol the park. Tonight and the rest of the weekend, I'm going to have 20 men in the park around the clock. You don't think that he'll be there tonight, do you? Pete looked down at the menu he was holding, trying to avoid Sam's eyes. As a matter of fact, I do. I know that he is struck every 6 weeks. I know that it hasn't been 6 weeks since the last abduction, but I got this gut feeling. If it isn't tonight, you son of a bitch. If it isn't tonight, I think it's going to be sometime this weekend. I somehow feel that I'm so close to the answer to this thing, but up till now, I just haven't been able to put my finger on it. Can I take your order? Nancy walked up to the booth and looked down at Pete, then quickly moved her eyes to the order pad she was holding. Hi, Nancy. I guess I'll have the usual. Sam, are you all set? Are you kidding? I'm having a four-course breakfast. I figure that it might be a long time before I'll get a chance. What's up with this Ta'id again today? Nancy wrote down the order from Pete, took the menu, and walked back to the kitchen. You two aren't hitting it off too well lately. What seems to be the problem? Sam asked as he put a large piece of sausage in his mouth. I guess it's all my fault, Sam, Pete said as he watched Sam eat. I just don't know how to act around her. I really goofed on her last date. How's that? Sam asked, his mouth full of food. Well, I really acted like a fool. She wanted me to kiss her, and when I finally did, she came on strong. Sam, she was all over me. It frightened me. I asked her to go up to her room. I'm a fool, Sam, a stupid fool. Sam recalled the conversation he had with Nancy. He still believed that what he told her was true. After all, the boy was brought up strict. He had a sense of morals. It wasn't unusual that he should act shy around the girl who was as experienced as Nancy. As he sat there, recalling the conversation, a frightening thought struck him. He was 24 years old and still a virgin. Sam looked across the table at his young friend. No, it couldn't be. Not his fine young man whom he had known all of his life. Sam, he told himself, you're grasping at straws. Sam, what is it? Why are you staring at me? Oh, I'm sorry, Pete. My mind is so wrapped up in this Hines Park matter that when I get a thought, I get carried away. What should I do about her, Sam? I like the girl very much and want to take her out again, but I'm afraid I blew it. Look, Pete, it's not your fault. Ginny raised you to respect girls. On the other hand, it's not Nancy's fault either. She is just a normal red-blooded girl who is acting like any other girl in this new liberated society. They have feelings just as you do. The only difference is that now, when they get these feelings, these desires, they let a boy know about it. In other words, Pete, when they want to get it on with a boy, they come right out and tell him. No more playing the shy role. The girls of today want their share of sex as well as the guys do, and they're not afraid to let their feelings be known. But Sam, it's wrong for a girl to act like that. No, Pete, it's not wrong. When you think about it, they have as much right to happiness as the guys do. Sure, I'll go along with the idea that some of these girls will fuck anybody at any time. Now that is wrong. In your case, however, the girl likes you. She wants to share herself with you. To me, Pete, that is not wrong. Nancy brought Pete's order and placed it in front of him. He glanced at her face as she bent close to him and noticed that she no longer had that solemn look about her. Her eyes were moist, almost as if she had been crying. Nancy, Nancy, I was wondering if you have any plans for tomorrow night. Would you would you like to take in a movie? He barely got the words out. Nancy looked down at Pete, then glanced over at Sam, who was nodding his head yes. Give me a call tomorrow, Pete. I think I can get away, Nancy smiled as she looked at him. Well, I guess that I'd better get on back to the office, Sam wiped his face with a napkin. I've got a feeling it's going to be a busy day. Pete dug into his scrambled eggs with a flourish, happy that he had a chance to go out with Nancy again. As he started to take a bite of his toast, a gnawing feeling hit him in the pit of his stomach. He suddenly remembered what he had to do tonight. A strange look came over him. It was as if he was suddenly transformed from a normal 24-year-old man talking to his best friend and his girlfriend to a vicious, sadistic killer. His face once again turned into the grinning mask that he had worn ever since Ginny died. Poor Ginny, his demented mind thought. Should I do as Carl suggested and let you rest? Could I bear the fact that you would be gone and that I would never? Is that what could? Does it say what could? It does say what could. That I would never be able to see you again. The good of his conscience was fighting with the evil in his subconscious mind. Both were trying to take possession of him. He thought about Nancy. Suppose she found out that it was he that was killing all the girls. He would lose her, he knew that. Let her go. The evil force in him said, after all, isn't Ginny more important than a slut like Nancy? A slut who wants to throw her body at you. No, I think I'm in love with her. His conscious mind argued. I want her. Do it this one last time for Ginny. The demon in him said, yes, he thought, I owe that much to her. This will be the last time. This time, however, he had to be careful. Sam would have the park heavily patrolled tonight. Get on there. That's all right. He had picked Levan Knoll. No one would ever see him in that sight. He finished his breakfast, left a generous tip, and walked to the counter. Nancy had looked over at Pete as she passed his booth to wait on another table. She noticed the complete change that had come over him. It didn't even look like Pete. His face was hard and cruel looking. She couldn't get over it. What a strange guy, she thought. It frightened her to see him like that. As she was taking the order from a couple at the table she had just approached, she had second thoughts about ever going out with him again. Shady Lawn. This is Pete Worthington. Is Josh Logan there? Josh Logan speaking. A gruff voice came on the phone. Josh, this is Pete. How are you? Not bad, Pete. Don't tell me. You got a last-minute client and you want us to open up for you, right? Open one up for you, right? I'm sorry, Josh. I don't know why I'm always a sucker for these people. This one was in a car accident up north. It happened 2 days ago, and the mother wants the girl buried here in Plymouth. The body is already decomposed, so it'll have to be done right away. I sure appreciate it, Josh. I'll charge her a little extra to make up for the inconvenience. How soon can you have a grave ready? You can bring the deceased out by 6 tonight. Thanks, Josh. I'll have all the necessary papers with me. See you tonight. After Pete had killed the first girl, he decided that the best way to dispose of the bodies was to have a funeral and bury them in the cemetery. The scheme was perfect. No one would suspect him. Now, after 4 killings, his idea proved to be correct. The police had not a clue as to how or where or what had been done with the bodies. Pete was, of course, well known at Shady Lawn. Most of his clients wanted their loved ones buried there. When he had called Josh the day after Jenny died and asked to purchase some cemetery lots, Josh thought nothing of it. Pete had explained to him that he had many clients who didn't own a lot and would ask him how to go about obtaining one. Since Pete was able to get the lots at a discount price because he bought a large quantity of them, Josh agreed with Pete. It was a good way to make a profit. Sarah at first thought nothing of Pete and Carl being the only ones at the funerals. Carl would ride along with Pete, who drove the hearse. No other cars would be present. Pete explained this by saying that the deceased had no living relatives and that the executor of the estate had asked him to bury the body. After the second girl was buried in this manner, she became suspicious. It was not normal to have a funeral and not have anyone attend a wake, or for that matter, not even to go to a cemetery to see the body put to rest. She had not questioned Carl about the strange funerals. She was already disturbed about the strange incidents that occurred in the home. Now that she and Muriel had discovered the corpse in Ginny's room, she had some idea of what was happening. She stood at the dining room window and watched as Pete helped Carl transfer the coffin from the gurney to the hearse. She watched as Pete and Carl got into the hearse and drove off. "May God have mercy on your soul," she said aloud as she crossed herself. Pete had parked his car behind some dense undergrowth at Levan Knoll. He had been sitting in his car for over an hour, observing the many young couples that were enjoying themselves on this warm summer evening. It was now 9 o'clock, an hour before the park officially closed. He would have to find his next victim soon, because he knew the restrictions that the sheriff had placed on the park. No one was allowed in the park after 10. Sam had told him earlier the park was being heavily patrolled this night. He had watched as police from the Plymouth Post and the sheriff's department drove by in their patrol cars every 15 minutes. Adjacent to where he was parked was a large playfield with teeter-totters, swings, slides, and at least 10 picnic tables. On the ridge overlooking the play area was a restroom. It was a brick building with a slate roof, similar to the other restrooms in the park. As his eyes looked at the scene of the young couples enjoying themselves in the play area in front of him, something caught his eye. As he looked to his right, he saw a tall girl dressed in a white bikini come out of the restroom on the hill and walk slowly down the steep incline. As she came closer, he could see that she had pitch black hair. She had a deep tan, which accented even more the white bikini that she wore. The material in the bikini top barely covered the nipples of her generous breasts. She had a slim waist, full hips, and a beautiful pair of legs. She walked over to a boy who was dressed only in a pair of brief, cut-off shorts. The boy was talking to another girl at the picnic table. The girl in the white bikini leaned against the table as if she was ill. The boy in the cutoffs put his arm around the girl, then let his hand caress her firm buttocks. Oh no, here comes the sex. She pushed him away and ran to a blanket, which was located on the hill near the deep undergrowth that surrounded the picnic site. As the astonished boy watched, the girl lay down on the blanket, pulling the material over her half-nude body. Pete knew that he had to act now. His car was parked in the underbrush to the east of the picnic area. It was well concealed. However, the spot where the girl was lying had no road behind it. This meant that he had to conceal himself behind the girl in the thick underbrush, pull the girl through the bushes, and then carry her to his car. It was not the usual MO that he had followed. Because it was getting late and because of the tight security in the park, he had no choice to make his move now. When he had reached the spot in the bushes behind the girl, he laid down in the grass. Nobody in the crowd at the picnic table seemed to be aware of the girl. They were now busy drinking beer and laughing and joking. Pete pulled out the cotton pad. From his other pocket, he removed the bottle of chloroform. He poured a generous amount of the yellow liquid onto the pad. He looked through the bushes at the reclining girl. She seemed to have fallen asleep in the blanket. Just as Pete was about to crawl through the bushes, a police car pulled into the parking area. A cop got out and slowly walked over to the picnic table. Pete couldn't hear what he was saying, but he noticed that the boy, who had his arm around the girl, turned and pointed to the girl lying on the blanket. The police officer walked over to where the girl was lying. "Say, miss," he said as he reached down and pulled off the part of the blanket that was covering her face, "you better get back with your friends at the table. I don't think it's safe to be over here by yourself." "Why? Why, officer?" The girl was startled by the young cop who was standing over her. "What's the matter?" As she sat up, the blanket fell away from her body, revealing bare breasts. When she had wrapped the blanket around her, she started to perspire, so she removed her bikini top. The cop looked down at the large oh no, at the large nipples that protruded from her ample breast. He got an instant erection. Look here, miss." He barely managed to get the words out. "Cover yourself up and get back to your friends. Don't you know that there's a maniac loose in the park?" The girl smiled up at the cop when she noticed him staring at her. She slowly picked up the discarded bikini top and deliberately took her time, enclosing her generous attributes. "All right, officer, whatever you say." She smiled at the helpless cop as she returned to the table. As he watched her walking toward the table, she swayed her hips. "Son of a bitch," the cop muttered. "These gals are something else." When the young cop looked in the girl's eyes as she was wrapped up in the blanket, he knew that she was on some type of drug. He didn't know for sure what she was on, but he figured it was probably pot or some speed, two of the most popular drugs used by the teenagers and the young crowd in the park. He had also noticed that she was drunk. He knew that the girl was underage, and if it had been any other night but this, he would have taken her whole crowd down to the station and booked them. Before the men had left the station a few hours earlier, Sam had told them not to bother arresting anyone for drinking or possession of drugs. "You're out there for only one reason," he had told them. "That's to catch this psycho." As the young cop was standing by the blanket watching the girl walk back to the table, he thought he heard a noise in the bushes behind him. The hair stood up at the back of his neck as he turned and looked behind him into the darkness behind the bushes. The sky was overcast this night, making it virtually impossible to see anything. He slowly walked along the row of bushes until he came to a small opening. As he walked through the opening, he removed his gun from his holster. He cursed himself for not bringing his flashlight, which he had left on the seat of his patrol car. He slowly walked along the back of the bushes, peering into the darkness. After walking the entire length of the dense undergrowth and then repeating his steps and finding nothing, he returned to the opening he had found and walked back to the picnic table where the young crowd was watching his movements. "Find anything?" a young girl dressed in a blue bikini asked the cop. "No, nothing." "Do yourself a favor, will you? Stay in a crowd. Don't wander off by yourself. We think this nut might try it again tonight. Don't forget the closing time. I want you all out of here by 10 tonight." Back in the bushes, Pete was beside himself with frustration. When he saw the cop come toward the bushes, he ran to another row of bushes that sat back about 20 feet from the spot he was hiding at. He held his breath as he saw the young cop walk toward him. As he watched the cop turn and walk back through the opening in the bushes and back to the picnic table, he let out a sigh of relief. His body was trembling from the ordeal he had just gone through. He was sweating profusely. He wiped the perspiration from his brow, then glanced at his watch. The illuminated numbers on his digital watch read 9:31, less than half an hour before the park closed. It looked like he would have to wait another night. There seemed no way that he could subdue a girl this evening. He crawled back to the opening in the row of thick bushes. As he peered through the opening, he saw the girl in the white bikini and the tall, well-built boy walk toward him. Each of them had a can of beer in one hand and a rolled joint in the other. When they reached the blanket, the girl threw her joint away and put her arms around the boy. He moved his head down to meet her lips. He gave her a long kiss, his tongue exploring her mouth. They fell to the blanket, the girl landing on top of his body. Discarding his joint and his beer, he quickly had her bikini top off and started kissing her ample breasts. Oh no. She started moaning and reached down to unzip the fly in his cutoffs. When she had his generous penis in her hand, she reached for the blanket and covered them both. Pete, who was watching the sexual episode before being performed in front of him, was deeply aroused. He reached for his crotch and do we have to go through this? He reached for his crotch and started rubbing his swollen organ. He watched as the couple under the blanket twisted and squirmed. He could hear the girl moan with pleasure, and the boy start to breathe heavily. In a few moments it was over, and the couple lay still under the blanket. Pete, who was breathing heavily himself, imagined what was happening under the blanket. Suddenly, the girl threw the blanket to one side, revealing two sweaty, nude bodies. The girl lay on her back, her body wet with perspiration. Pete watched as tiny trickles of sweat moved from her ample breast down her flat stomach to wet the dark patch of pubic hair. The boy, his penis now limp, was lying on his side facing the girl. They were both breathing heavily, their bodies almost trembling from the furious pace that they had put them through. The girl turned to face the boy lying next to her. With one hand, she reached down and grasped his limp penis and started massaging it. "Hey, baby," the boy said, moving her hand away. "We better get out of here. It's almost closing time." "Oh, come on," the drug girl slurred her words. "We got time for a quickie. I'd love to, baby, but that cop may show up here again, and I don't want to get my ass busted. We'd better go." With that, he got up, zipped up his pants, and walked back to the table. Pete saw his chance. He would have to move quickly. After he had soaked the pad with some more chloroform, he moved through the opening in the bushes. The girl was still lying on the blanket. She had not bothered to cover herself. He quickly put the pad over her nose and mouth, and with his other hand held her shoulders to the ground. Because of her drug-induced state, she hardly struggled. In a few seconds, she was unconscious. Pete dragged the girl through the bushes, leaving the chloroformed pad lying in the blanket. He had just pulled her through the thick hedge when the boy, who was at the picnic table, turned and looked in the direction of the blanket. "She's gone," he shouted to the other kids at the table. As the young couple started running toward the spot where the boy had left the girl, Pete carried the unconscious body in his arms to his waiting car. He quickly laid her in the back seat. Starting the engine, he put the car in gear and sped out of the picnic site toward the main road in the park. "Look!" a boy shouted as he saw the black LTD turn on Hines Drive and speed down the blacktop road. "There he goes." Pete drove 1 block to the dirt road where he had hidden the van. He quickly transferred the girl to the van, got in, and drove off. Within minutes, he was back at the funeral home with his next victim. This is some riveting stuff. I need to go eat breakfast and go to work. What are we, page 76? How many pages are there? Nearly halfway done. All right, Brubs, that's all.